Good evening, and welcome to Late Night Science, your quiet place to drift into rest while still letting curiosity roam. Wherever you are listening from, a quiet room, a darkened city, or a drifting train of thought, let this be a moment to slow the mind. If you find comfort in these soft explorations, you can gently like, subscribe, or simply stay for a while. Tonight, we begin not with noise or data, but with stillness. A stillness that lives beneath everything we think we know. Before thought, before memory, before even the faint hum of awareness, there is a quiet pulse that moves through the mind. It isn't silence in the ordinary sense, for true silence doesn't exist, not even in the vacuum between stars. This is a deeper kind of quiet, the sort that breathes rather than ends. The mind at rest is not empty. It's full of the invisible architecture that holds every moment you've ever lived. Beneath each thought is a pause, a subtle rhythm that allows the thought to be born. To find the quiet within is to listen for that space, not to what the mind says, but to the vastness it creates around what it says. Imagine the brain as an ocean. On its surface, waves of thought rise and crash, breaking into words, plans, and worries. But below that surface there is a slow, ancient calm, a deep current that has moved since before you were aware of being alive. This current doesn't ask or answer. It simply exists steady and immense. Neuroscientists might call it baseline activity or resting state networks, but those phrases only touch the surface. Beneath the language of science lies the poetry of experience, the sense that the mind, even when still, is quietly alive. If you were to peer into the brain in this moment, with all its shimmering webs of neurons, you'd see that even at rest, it glows. Billions of cells whispering softly to one another form patterns that never quite disappear. The brain never sleeps entirely. It hums like a galaxy between stars. That faint hum is the mind's resting song, the rhythm of being without doing. And yet somehow, it is from this near silence that everything begins. There is something paradoxical here. Science tells us that thought is built from motion, from ions moving, from signals flashing across synapses. But subjectively, thought often feels like stillness, like something unfolding within a quiet room. How can so much movement create such peace? The answer, perhaps, is that the mind is not simply the sum of its parts. It is an orchestra whose music becomes silence when heard as a whole. Each neuron fires, yet together they create something smooth, continuous, serene, the steady background upon which consciousness paints its colors. You might notice it when you pause between breaths. For a brief instant before the next inhale, the mind suspends itself. In that suspension, there is a kind of timelessness. You're not lost in memory or anticipation. You're simply here. That moment, fleeting and fragile, is the same quiet that shaped the earliest awareness. It is the 0 point from which every perception expands. Meditation, at its core, is the art of returning to that point. Scientists studying experienced meditators see patterns of calm synchronization, regions of the brain that begin to hum in coherence. But the true phenomenon is not electrical, it's experiential. It's the discovery that behind the noise of thought lies an ancient quiet, and that quiet is alive. To rest in that silence is not to turn away from the world, but to feel it more fully, for in quiet, boundaries soften. The sound of your own thoughts becomes indistinguishable from the hum of the world, the ticking of a clock, the low rustle of air, the beat of a distant heart, all begin to blur into one continuous vibration. The scientist might describe it as sensory integration, a merging of internal and external signals. The poet would simply call it oneness. Both are correct in their own ways. The mind, even when it seems empty, is a landscape. There are valleys of calm, rivers of thought, and wide plains of awareness stretching beyond sight. Within these landscapes move small sparks, early flickers of cognition, faint glimmers of curiosity. The silence of the mind is not the absence of thought, but the soil from which thought grows. Just as the earth must be still for seeds to take root, the mind must find stillness for insight to bloom. Every idea that has ever changed the world began in a pause, that gentle gap where something unseen begins to take shape. In the lab, scientists measure brain activity during rest and find what they call the default mode network, a constellation of regions that light up when the mind drifts, daydreams, or reflects inward. It is the architecture of inner life, the structure of silence itself. Yet for all our measurement, the mystery remains. Why does the mind create space before it creates thought? Why does the quiet feel so essential, so meaningful, when it seems to do nothing at all? Perhaps because stillness is the foundation upon which consciousness builds its home. You can feel it now if you listen closely. The air around you carries no command, no urgency. It simply is. The same is true of the mind's quiet. It holds no agenda, yet it allows everything to happen. The storm of thought rises and falls within it, never disturbing its depth. There's comfort in that, knowing that beneath every worry and every rush of emotion, there is a ground that doesn't move. Neuroscience might describe it as homeostasis, the balance the brain constantly maintains to preserve life. But you can also think of it as a spiritual center, a stillness that does not belong to time. The longer you stay with it, the more the boundaries between thought and silence blur. You begin to sense that thinking is not something separate from quiet. It is simply the quiet vibrating in more complex patterns. Like ripples on water, thoughts appear, shimmer and fade, but the lake beneath remains unchanged. That lake, that depth, is the mind's true nature. Dynamic, yet unmoving. Intricate, yet serene. So tonight, as you listen, let yourself drift toward that place. You don't have to control your thoughts or silence them. Simply notice the space between them. That soft interval where nothing needs to be done. It's there, in that space, that the mind renews itself. It's there that consciousness breathes. Perhaps this is the great secret hidden in the simplest of moments. The quiet within you is not emptiness, but possibility. It's the canvas upon which every spark of thought will later appear. Soon, those sparks will awaken, tiny flashes within the darkness, forming the first whispers of the mind's electricity. But for now, we linger here in the calm before the current. If you listen carefully, you can almost feel it, the stillness waiting to become light. There was a time when silence ruled everything, when existence was a patient hum without voice, without motion, without knowing. And then somewhere in that vast quiet, a spark. It was not thought, not yet. It was a shimmer of response, a tremor in matter, a flicker of awareness born from reaction. The first neuron did not plan or wonder. It simply responded. In that moment, the universe learned to whisper through the living. It began in the dark seas of ancient Earth. Within the salt and heat, molecules danced in random collisions, but now and then, a pattern formed, something that could sense, however faintly, the difference between warmth and cold, between danger and safety. Electricity, once the language of storms, entered the body. The same lightning that once split the skies now coursed through cells, tracing invisible paths through flesh and time. And as these electrical pulses multiplied, life began to feel. Every spark was a message, not words, not yet meaning, but signals. One cell learned to send, another to receive. And through that fragile bridge, communication was born. The neuron, a simple thread of energy and structure, became nature's instrument for memory, reaction, and eventually reflection. To understand the mind, we return to that original flicker, the way matter discovered motion from within, and the way that motion began to remember itself. Imagine it, A single neuron, a delicate filament suspended in fluid darkness. Its body hums with charge, its extensions reaching like roots and branches through a microscopic forest. When a signal arrives, a wave of ions rushes along its length, a cascade of motion faster than thought, yet older than language. These currents are so small, and yet together they form the rhythm of consciousness. Each flicker is a syllable in the brain's silent poetry. You could think of the neuron as a tiny gatekeeper of light. Its electric surge is an echo of ancient storms, reshaped into a pattern that carries meaning. Sodium and potassium trade places, creating a brief pulse that races down an axon, an electrical whisper that ends in chemistry. At its tip, the neuron releases molecules that drift across a synapse, a gap so small it feels impossible that anything could cross it. But across that space, signals leap, electricity turning to matter and back again. In those leaps, thought begins to take shape. For millions of years, these sparks existed without awareness. They fired for survival, to move toward food, to retreat from threat, to navigate the thin line between being and not being. But in their endless repetition, something began to change. Networks formed. Sparks synchronized. The storm grew more intricate. Each new connection allowed new patterns, and patterns, once complex enough, began to resemble thought. When we peer into the brain today and to its glowing labyrinth of connections, we are looking at lightning slowed down and folded into form. Every flash of insight, every memory, every dream is a cascade of tiny electrical storms echoing through your head. Trillions of connections flicker in coordination, their choreography unseen yet profoundly precise. A thought is not one spark, but billions, each finding its place in a pattern that lasts only a moment before dissolving into the next. Science calls it the neural code, a dance of frequency, timing, and synchronization. But it is also, in a more human sense, a story. The story of how the universe began to talk to itself. Within every pulse of the neuron is the memory of the cosmos, learning to organize chaos into coherence. It's as if lightning, after striking the same ocean for eons, decided one day to stay, to live inside the creatures that emerged from its water. You carry this storm within you. The quiet you felt in the previous chapter still exists, but within that quiet are these countless sparks flashing in patterns that define who you are. A memory, a heartbeat, a fleeting sense of déjà vu, all born from tiny flares of electricity dancing across microscopic bridges. You are a constellation of lightning woven into biology, a living storm contained within skin. And yet, for all its power, the neuron is fragile. It cannot think alone. A single spark fades into nothing without others to receive it. Meaning emerges only when billions of signals intertwine, forming pathways that repeat and reinforce. The brain's beauty lies in this paradox. Individuality at the level of the cell, unity at the level of the whole. Each neuron fires on its own, yet none alone is the mind. It is in their conversation that consciousness arises. It is an orchestra whose instruments are made of light and chemistry. Think of it as a city at night, viewed from far above. Each neuron is a building, each light a window glowing for an instant. From above, the pattern looks alive, waves of illumination sweeping across neighborhoods, bridges lighting up in sequence, signals pulsing through unseen streets. You could almost believe the city itself is thinking. That is the mind, not a single spark, but the pattern of all sparks together, forever flickering, forever changing, and within that constant motion lies something sacred. These electrical signals are not random. They are shaped by experience. Every touch, every sound, every fragment of memory you hold has etched new pathways into this storm. When you learn, you are literally changing the architecture of your inner lightning, guiding energy along new routes, strengthening bridges that did not exist before. The mind, then, is not a static thing, but a living weather system. It storms and clears, forms and reforms, creating meaning from motion. Perhaps this is what consciousness truly is, electricity given shape by time. The same force that once tore the sky apart now illuminates imagination. The same flashes that once struck oceans now create ideas. What began as survival became sensation. Sensation became perception. Perception became reflection. From spark to signal to thought, the chain of becoming continues, each link glowing briefly before giving rise to the next. And yet, beneath all this, the question lingers. When did the spark stop being mere reaction and start being experience? When did the firing of neurons become the feeling of self? Science, with all its precision, cannot yet say. Between chemistry and consciousness lies a veil we have only begun to lift. The spark tells us how, but not why. The brain explains the mechanism, but not the miracle, so we linger here, in this space between lightning and thought, marveling at how matter learned to feel. The neurons hum, the signals leap, the mind stirs, and somewhere within that electrical storm, awareness flickers awake. Soon, we will step deeper into this labyrinth to trace how these sparks weave themselves into architecture, the folds, corridors, and bridges that give shape to memory, emotion, and reason. But for now, imagine the darkness once more, quiet, infinite, and within it, a single flash, a whisper of light that says, "I am here." Inside your head lies a cathedral of light. It is not built of stone or steel, but of cells and current, a vast labyrinth folded within itself. If you could wander through it, you would find corridors that hum with memory, chambers where emotion breathes, and delicate bridges where logic tries to cross the unknown. Every corner of this inner world plays its part in the grand harmony we call the mind. Yet none alone could ever be it. The brain is not a machine. It is a landscape, fluid, shifting, self-renewing. Its hills are folds of cortex. Its rivers are networks of firing neurons. Its valleys filled with signals that rise and fade like mist. From the outside it looks still, but inside it moves with the rhythm of thought. Every second, billions of cells exchange tiny bursts of light and chemistry, weaving patterns that last only as long as attention allows. The architecture of thought is alive. It changes with every choice, every memory, every night of sleep. Imagine standing within this living structure. Around you, neurons branch like trees, each one touching thousands of others through fragile, glowing threads. Their intersections form constellations, patterns of possibility. One region, the hippocampus, gathers these flickers into memory, stitching the passing moments of life into something that endures. The amygdala, small but fierce, colors those memories with emotion, joy, fear, sorrow, hope, tinting the record of experience with feeling. Deeper still, the prefrontal cortex shapes reason, balancing impulse with plan, transforming instinct into decision. Each of these regions speaks its own language, yet none works in isolation. The mind exists only when these voices merge, a chorus of light in constant negotiation. The hippocampus recalls, the amygdala feels, the cortex decides, and somewhere within that collaboration arises the self. Not a commander, but a conductor. You are the harmony they create together. Scientists have mapped these territories with precision, tracing electrical pathways as though charting the veins of a hidden world. But the closer they look, the more mysterious it becomes. The brain's geography is not like the world's geography. It is not static. Each map dissolves as soon as it's drawn, reconfiguring in response to thought, experience, or memory. When you recall a childhood moment, you literally reshape the network that holds it. Memory is not a photograph stored in a vault. It is a performance, a reawakening of the same neurons that once fired in the original moment. Every act of remembering rebuilds the architecture anew. Perhaps that is why thought feels alive, because it is. Each emotion, each idea is not merely contained in the brain, it transforms it. Your sadness leaves traces in your circuitry. Your joy lights new paths. With time, these pathways form habits of feeling, patterns of thought, tendencies of perception. You are, in part, the structure of your own inner labyrinth, a living architecture sculpted by experience. Yet even this complexity cannot capture what it feels like from within. The electrical storms, the chemical symphonies, the folds and fissures, they describe the mechanism, but not the melody. What transforms this anatomy into awareness remains the greatest puzzle in science. How can matter arranged in space produce the sense of meaning, of being, of presence? It is as though the cathedral built itself, stone by stone, neuron by neuron, until one day it began to hear its own echo. To walk through this mental cathedral is to witness a dialogue between precision and mystery. In one corridor, logic builds its scaffolding, patterns of reasoning, cause and effect, structure and proof. In another, emotion breathes softly through the walls, coloring the light with warmth or shadow. They meet at countless intersections, shaping the way you perceive the world. A thought without feeling is mechanical. A feeling without thought is chaos. The mind, in its balance, allows both to coexist, a harmony of opposites played on an instrument that never stops tuning itself. When you ponder an idea, countless regions awaken in sequence. Visual areas conjure images. Auditory ones recreate the subtle echoes of inner dialogue. Association cortices connect them all in a tapestry of context. The brain doesn't think in lines, and it thinks in networks. A single idea may ignite dozens of areas at once, creating a pattern that is both familiar and entirely new. To think is to travel through this luminous maze, guided not by a map, but by resonance, by what feels true. It's easy to imagine thought as something airy and abstract, but it has weight, shape, and rhythm. Each moment of insight corresponds to a pulse of synchronization, neurons firing in unison across vast distances, binding perception and memory into a single instant of clarity. These pulses can be seen, measured, and yet they are also ineffable, like music written in a language only the brain can read. The architecture of thought is, in this sense, not a structure, but a song. One that writes itself anew with every note you play. If you were to stand outside yourself for a moment and listen, you might sense this inner symphony. Beneath your conscious awareness, patterns emerge and fade, fragments of melody waiting to be recognized. Some patterns are ancient, shaped by evolution, the instinct to survive, to seek connection, to avoid harm. Others are personal, carved by the choices and memories that make you who you are. Together they create a vast composition, made part inherited, part learned, a harmony that feels like identity. And yet within this intricate order there is always room for chance. A stray signal, a random spark, can create an entirely new pathway. Creativity is born from these moments. When the architecture bends, when the network dares to form a new connection. The brain, even in its order, is a playground for chaos. Without that randomness, thought would be repetition. With it, we get imagination, the mind's most beautiful rebellion. So we wander endlessly through this inner labyrinth, not to find its end, but to marvel at its design. You are both the traveler and the landscape, the architect and the architecture. Every thought you have reshapes the very space that creates it. The brain is not a machine recording reality. It is a living structure inventing it moment by moment, and somewhere within this endless construction, perception begins to form, the first mirror held up to the world. Soon, these circuits will translate light into color, vibration into sound, contact into feeling. The storm of signals will learn to see itself reflected in everything it touches. But before that mirror awakens, pause here for a moment longer. Listen to the quiet hum of the architecture within you. Feel how every thought leaves an echo, every memory a trace, every feeling a bridge to the next. This is the mind as symphony, vast, intricate, unfinished. And in its depths, something begins to stir. The first reflection, waiting to be seen. The world as you know it does not exist as you see it. The colors, the sounds, the textures you move through each day. They are not the world itself, but the mind's translation of it. Light does not come labeled with blue or gold. Air does not carry the sound of a voice. These are creations of the brain, woven from raw signals into meaning. Every experience is a reflection, a painting done on the surface of consciousness. Delicate, momentary, alive. Close your eyes for a moment. The world outside continues, the hum of traffic, the whisper of wind. But what you perceive is not the air itself, only the mind's echo of it. Between the external world and your awareness lies a mirror, invisible yet absolute. Through it, reality becomes experience. Through it, the chaos of existence turns into the story of your life. Science tells us that perception begins as chemistry and physics. Light strikes the retina, air vibrates through the cochlea, pressure bends receptors in the skin. But these are only beginnings, the alphabet of sensation. The real story unfolds deeper inside, where the brain transforms these signals into something felt. Millions of neurons conspire to interpret, to predict, to give meaning. Vision is not received, it is constructed. Sound is not heard, it is assembled. The brain is less a camera and more a painter, and it paints with memory, emotion, and expectation. Imagine standing before a landscape, a forest at dusk, light falling through the leaves. What you see is not the forest itself, but a symphony of interpretations. Your eyes capture wavelengths of light, but your brain translates them into green, shadow, and depth. Your memories add warmth to the colors. Your emotions decide whether the scene feels lonely or alive. The forest you perceive is unique to you, a reflection shaped by the entire history of your mind. Every perception is filtered through layers of prediction. The brain is constantly guessing what it will encounter, filling in what it does not know. Most of the time, these guesses are invisible. You see a continuous, stable world because your mind anticipates its structure. When those predictions fail, perception stutters. You notice the glitch, the optical illusion, the déjà vu, the strange sense of wrongness that flickers when expectation and reality fall out of sync. These moments reveal the truth that seeing is not passive. It is the mind dreaming the world into coherence. Within this delicate process lies both wonder and vulnerability. Because if the mind creates what it perceives, then perception is always personal. The same sound can soothe one person and irritate another. The same face can appear kind or cold, depending on the story the mind tells. What you perceive is not what is, but what matters to you. A translation written in emotion. The amygdala colors every image with feeling. The prefrontal cortex weighs it with judgment. The hippocampus ties it to memory. Together they decide what becomes reality and what fades into noise. Even color itself is an illusion shaped by contrast. There is no such thing as red in the world, only light of certain wavelengths. Yet the mind turns it into passion, danger, warmth. When you see a sunset, the sky is not glowing with emotion, you are. The external light enters your eyes, but its beauty blooms within. Perception, then, is a dialogue between the outer and inner worlds, one providing signals, the other giving them soul. It's strange to realize how little of reality we actually experience. The eyes capture only a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum, the ears only a small slice of vibration. What lies beyond, the ultraviolet, the infrasonic, the silent motions of atoms, passes by unseen. The universe is vast, yet our senses reveal only a thin slice of it, shaped to our survival rather than to truth. The world we know is not the world that is, but the one we can endure. And still, within that limitation, there is beauty. The brain's artistry turns scarcity into richness. With a fraction of the universe's data, it builds a living, breathing scene, complete with texture, depth, and emotion. Perception is not about seeing everything. It's about seeing enough to belong. Evolution shaped our senses not for accuracy, but for meaning. We don't need to know the full spectrum of light, only how to recognize a friend's face, the warmth of fire, the coming of dawn. The brain filters reality until it fits the shape of being human. Yet in moments of awe, the mirror softens. Standing beneath the stars, listening to a song that stirs memory, feeling the sea pull at your feet, the boundaries between inner and outer begin to blur. The reflection feels closer to the source. Perhaps this is why beauty feels transcendent. It's the rare moment when perception forgets to protect us and the world floods in unfiltered. For an instant we perceive not through thought, but through presence. Reality, seen before, belief catches up. But for most of life, the mirror remains in place, quietly shaping what we call real. And that mirror is not fixed. It bends with emotion, with memory, with time. A child's laughter sounds different to a grieving heart. The same sunset shifts its meaning from one day to the next. The world outside hasn't changed. The reflection has. We do not merely perceive, we interpret. And in that interpretation, we live. Neuroscientists often describe perception as a controlled hallucination, a balance between prediction and correction, imagination and evidence. The mind projects its best guess, then adjusts it using sensory input. Reality, then, is a conversation between what the world offers and what the mind expects. When the balance is right, perception feels stable. When it falters, illusions arise, the mirages, the misheard words, the phantom sensations that remind us that our experience of the world is an act of creation. Perhaps that is what makes perception so human, this blending of truth and dream. We are not passive witnesses of existence. We are participants in its unfolding. Every color you see, every sound you hear, is the mind touching the universe and calling it real. The mirror of perception doesn't merely reflect, it paints. And in that painting you find meaning, comfort, sometimes even love. As you listen now, notice how your perception narrows and expands. The voice you hear is not a vibration in the air. It is your brain translating air into thought. The stillness you feel is not in the room. It is in you. Everything you know passes through this invisible mirror, turning physics into feeling, matter into mind. And soon we'll turn that mirror inward, toward the images that linger after the world has passed. For perception does not end when the moment ends. It leaves traces, ripples, impressions. The echoes of what was seen become the river of what is remembered. But before we drift there, pause with this thought. The world you see is not out there. It is within, alive on the surface of your own reflection. Memory is the river that runs through the landscape of the mind. It carries us from moment to moment, linking who we were to who we are. Yet, like any river, it is always in motion, reshaping its banks, deepening in some places, vanishing in others. What we remember is not a fixed recording of the past, but a living current, forever rewriting itself as it flows. You can feel it when a scent pulls you backward through time. The faint sweetness of rain on dust, the echo of laughter long gone. The past rises not as it was, but as your mind reimagines it. In the quiet theater of the brain, fragments of experience gather, collide, and merge into stories. What feels like recall is, in truth, recreation. A delicate act of rebuilding from pieces scattered across the mind's vast terrain. Science tells us that memory lives not in one place but in many. The hippocampus acts as the bridge, the initial collector of experience, while the cortex holds its echoes, spreading details across regions of sensation, emotion, and meaning. To remember, the brain must reunite them, reactivating the same patterns of light that once defined the moment itself. But every reactivation alters the pattern slightly, as if each remembrance were a hand stirring the water. We do not retrieve memories. We rewrite them. Think of the hippocampus as the river's source, a spring deep in the folds of the brain. From there, experiences flow outward, branching into countless tributaries. The visual details settle in one region, the emotions in another, the logic elsewhere still. When you recall an event, the hippocampus calls them back together, weaving a temporary unity out of scattered fragments. But when the memory fades again, the pieces drift apart, leaving only a trace of their connection, a ghostly map of what once felt whole. This is why memory can be both vivid and unreliable. It is not a file retrieved intact, but a symphony replayed by musicians who change their tempo each time. The melody remains familiar, but no performance is the same. Emotion especially reshapes memory. Fear sharpens the edges, joy softens them, grief distorts their hue. We remember not the truth of what happened, but the feeling of having lived it. The mind, ever the storyteller, polishes and edits the past until it fits the present. Sometimes this rewriting serves us. It allows healing, the softening of pain, the dulling of loss. But it can also create falsehoods, illusions of memory so convincing that they feel truer than fact. Neuroscience calls this reconsolidation. Every time a memory is recalled, it becomes briefly malleable, open to alteration before it settles again. It is as though the river's flow briefly slows, its surface smooth, allowing any reflection, real or imagined, to imprint upon it. Once it moves again, that new reflection becomes part of the stream. You live in that flow, continuously carried forward by the currents of what you remember. Without memory, identity would dissolve. The self depends on continuity, on the sense that the one who remembers yesterday is the same as the one breathing today. But the truth is subtler. The river renews itself each moment, even as it appears unchanged. The water that touched your childhood is not the same that carries you now, and yet the pattern of its motion with the rhythm of its flow that endures. To forget, too, is part of the river's wisdom. The brain does not store every detail because to do so would drown perception in noise. Forgetting clears the channels, keeping the current moving. Synapses weaken, pathways fade, memories erode, and in that erosion lies freedom. Imagine if every moment were remembered equally, every face in a crowd, every sound in a street. Life would become unbearable, a flood without form. The brain's gift is not in holding everything, but in letting go enough to live. Sometimes, forgetting is gentle, like the slow fading of ink in sunlight. Other times, it is violent, the sudden collapse of memory in trauma, disease, or time's relentless pull. In those moments, the self seems to thin, as if the river itself had run dry. And yet, even then, something remains. An undercurrent of being deeper than recollection. The body remembers, the emotions remember, the soul remembers in ways words cannot. You can sense this undercurrent in dreams, where memory drifts free of chronology, blending past and present into one seamless stream. A childhood home merges with a recent face. A long-lost sound resurfaces without warning. The dream state reminds us that memory is not a timeline but an ocean of impressions, stirred by feeling rather than logic. Even when you think you've forgotten, the river remembers, quietly beneath the surface. In waking life, memory shapes perception. What you see and hear is filtered through what you've seen and heard before. The present is never pure. It arrives tinted by the echoes of the past. That is why nostalgia, feels both beautiful and haunting. It is perception folding backward, touching the same waters twice. And in those ripples we find meaning, the illusion of continuity, the comfort of believing the river has a single course. But every course bends. Memories accumulate silt, details smoothed away by time. Sometimes the river overflows, carrying with it recollections we thought buried. Sometimes it splits, one current bright with joy, the other dark with regret. The brain doesn't separate them neatly. Happiness and sorrow often flow from the same source, intertwined like tributaries feeding a greater sea. You can't recall one without disturbing the other. Still, in that mingling lies the depth of human experience. The imperfections of memory, and its distortions, its gaps, its tenderness, make us who we are. The mind's rewriting of the past is not deceit, but adaptation. We remember to survive, not to document. The stories memory tells may change, but the feeling of self, the continuity of being, persists. The river flows, and in its motion, you remain. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the reach of measurement, memory itself remembers you. The neurons that once fired to record a moment may be long quiet, yet the pattern they created echoes faintly in the mind's architecture. When you stand in a place you've loved or hear a familiar song, that echo stirs, a resonance between past and present, reminding you that time does not erase. It transforms as you drift deeper into this thought. Notice how memory and imagination blur. To recall is to dream awake. The line between what was and what could be grows thin, like mist rising from a river at dawn. Every memory, even the clearest one, carries the shimmer of invention. You are both the dreamer and the dream, shaping the story of your life each time you remember it. And as night approaches, the river slows. The conscious mind begins to rest, but the current never stops. It slips into quieter channels where images loosen and emotions unfurl. Soon, memory will dissolve into another realm, one where logic softens and fragments drift freely between worlds. That is where we are headed next, into the landscape of dreams, where the river of memory becomes a sea of imagination. When the body sleeps, the mind does not. It slips beneath the surface of awareness into a quiet motion of its own, a realm where logic loosens and meaning is painted in shifting light. Dreams are the mind's nocturnal language, half memory, half imagination, whispered in symbols only the subconscious understands. They are the bridge between order and chaos, the hidden workshop where emotion, memory, and thought weave their strange rehearsals for waking life. Sleep begins as surrender. The senses withdraw, the muscles still, and consciousness fades like twilight dissolving into night. Yet beneath this calm, the brain ignites. Neurons flicker in rhythmic bursts, replaying patterns of the day. The hippocampus sifts through the debris of experience, deciding what to keep and what to let go. It is as though the mind, like a river after rain, must clear itself, sorting the stones of memory from the sand of noise. In this process, fragments of the day find new forms. A passing sound, a forgotten face, a flicker of emotion, all merge into unfamiliar combinations. The brain rehearses possibilities, testing emotional responses, resolving tensions too delicate for the waking world. A fear unspoken may return as a chase through shadowed streets. A wish denied might rise as a moment of flight. Dreams do not mirror life, they interpret it. Scientists have mapped the sleeping brain with electrodes and scanners, yet even the sharpest image cannot capture its meaning. Rapid eye movement, bursts of theta waves, surges of limbic activity, all are measurable, but the essence of dreaming is not data, it is experience. To dream is to feel the soul thinking in its own language. It is the mind's poetry, vivid, irrational, yet deeply true. Across the ages, dreams have been read as prophecy, divine message, or madness. But perhaps they are something gentler, the psyche's way of keeping balance. In waking life, reason rules, linear, deliberate, bound by time. In dreaming, that order dissolves. Time folds in on itself, causality bends, and emotion becomes architecture. You do not move through dreams. They move through you. The dreamer is both author and audience, both character and stage. Each night, your consciousness drifts through cycles, descending into deep sleep, then rising into the bright shallows of REM. In deep sleep, the mind restores. In REM, it creates. The boundaries blur as you drift between them, the same way dusk blurs day and night. You may not remember most dreams, yet they leave their mark. They shape your mood, your creativity, your quiet sense of being. Even unremembered, they guide the emotional tide of the next day. Some scientists believe dreaming evolved as a rehearsal, a way to simulate danger and prepare responses without real risk. Others suggest it's a form of emotional regulation, helping the brain to process what it cannot confront awake. Both may be true. Dreams are the mind's testing ground, where emotion can unfold safely, stripped of consequence but rich with insight. When you awaken from a nightmare and feel relief, or from a peaceful dream and feel calm linger, that is the residue of emotional integration. But dreams are not only therapy, they are also creation. Many of humanity's great ideas emerged from them. Melodies, inventions, works of art. The sleeping mind is unbound by logic, free to explore combinations the waking mind would dismiss. A scientist may find a pattern that reason overlooked. An artist may glimpse a world that does not yet exist. Dreaming is imagination untethered, the birthplace of possibility, and yet not all dreams are kind. Some are dense with unease, looping through fear or loss. These darker dreams are not punishment but messages, the psyche's attempt to illuminate what the conscious mind avoids. Nightmares are like emotional storms, brief but cleansing. They shake loose what has been buried too long. After them, the skies of the mind often clear. Still, there is mystery in the act itself. How does consciousness create a world so real that you believe it until you awaken? How does a single mind conjure landscapes, dialogue, sensations, entire narratives from silence? Within the neural storm of REM sleep, the brain becomes both universe and observer. The same circuits that perceive reality by day generate illusion by night. To dream is to experience the raw power of perception, unanchored, self-contained, alive. Dreams also blur the line between self and other. In them, you may become someone else or no one at all. You may stand in two places at once, feel a dozen emotions simultaneously, or witness yourself from afar. The boundaries of identity loosen and the deeper mind explores forms of being that waking thought could never sustain. It is as if consciousness rehearses its own flexibility, reminding itself that the self is not fixed, but fluid. And then there are lucid dreams, rare moments when awareness stirs within the dream. The dreamer realizes, I am dreaming, and the world responds. Walls dissolve, skies open, and imagination obeys intention. It is a glimpse of creation in its purest form, thought shaping reality in real time. In those lucid instants, one senses the vast creative power that always hums beneath waking awareness, usually unseen. Yet most dreams remain wordless and fleeting. They pass through the mind like wind through tall grass, bending thought without leaving a mark. Still, something deep within remembers. Even when forgotten, their work continues, emotions softened, connections strengthened, insights planted like seeds beneath the soil of consciousness. The next day's calm creativity or quiet melancholy may all be the fruit of dreams unseen. Perhaps then dreaming is not escape but return. a nightly journey back to the source of self. Beneath all the symbols and stories lies a single motion, the mind seeking harmony within itself. Every night you dissolve into that current, becoming part of something older than thought, more honest than reason. And when dawn comes, the veil lifts. The dream fades like mist retreating from light, leaving behind only traces. The echo of a feeling, the shadow of an image, the quiet certainty that something within you has shifted. You awaken renewed, not because you rested, but because the dream carried you across the threshold between chaos and order and set you gently back on the shore of waking life. Soon, the day will stir the mind again. Thought will sharpen. Memory will resume its flow and emotion will rise. But for a moment, as you open your eyes, you can still feel it. That soft vibration from the dream world, the heartbeat beneath awareness. That pulse, ancient, immediate, alive, is where we go next. Before thought, there was feeling. Before language, before reason, before even awareness itself, there was the pulse. Emotion is the ancient music of the mind, the living current that once guided creatures long before they could think. It is the heartbeat of evolution, so it's immediate, powerful, wordless. You can silence thought with will, but not emotion. It rises like the tide, beyond command, shaping every choice you make, every truth you believe. The brain is not a cold machine. It is warm and fluid, its chemistry humming with moods and meanings. Beneath the cortical towers of logic lies the limbic sea, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the insula, a network that feels before it knows. When the eyes catch danger, when the heart meets beauty, these ancient regions flare with signals older than language. A flash of fear, a surge of love, a tremor of sadness. Each is a pattern of electricity and molecule, yet more than that. They are the whispers of survival, the echoes of every ancestor who ever felt and lived to tell through the body. Emotion does not wait for reason's approval. A heartbeat can quicken before you understand why. The palms can sweat before a single thought forms. The mind then scrambles to explain what the body already knows. This is the quiet hierarchy of being, first feeling, then thought, then story. Even reason itself is built upon the scaffolding of emotion. For what is logic without desire, without care, without purpose to steer it? Scientists once believed emotion clouded judgment, but now they know without it judgment collapses. Those who lose emotional centers to injury can still think but cannot decide. They calculate endlessly, unable to choose between two options that feel identical. Reason without emotion is directionless, a compass without magnetic north. Feeling gives meaning its weight, its gravity. In the brain's symphony, emotion is percussion. It drives rhythm, tempo, and tone. Joy accelerates thought. Sorrow slows it to reflection. Anger focuses, fear disperses, love expands. Each feeling colors perception, bending reality in subtle ways. Under joy, the world glows with possibility. Under despair, even light feels heavy. Emotion doesn't just react to the world, it creates it. What you feel becomes what you see. Consider fear, the first teacher of survival. In its grip, the body sharpens into readiness. Pupils widen, blood races, muscles tighten. Every sense turns outward, scanning for threat. But fear can also turn inward, feeding on imagination. The same neural pathways that once kept ancestors safe from predators can now haunt us with worry. The brain's brilliance and its burden are the same. The ability to feel beyond the moment. Then there is joy, the quiet hum that tells the body it is safe, connected, alive. Joy is the mind's sunlight, dissolving boundaries between self and world. It floods the system with dopamine and serotonin, chemical warmth spreading like dawn. To feel joy is to sense alignment, the world outside and the world within briefly resonating at the same frequency. Sadness, though often shunned, has its wisdom too. It slows the mind, urging stillness, reflection, repair. When we grieve, the mind rewrites its maps of attachment, learning to live without what it loves. Sorrow is not a flaw. It is adaptation in motion, a way to make meaning from loss. Tears carry chemistry as old as rain, washing emotion from the inside out, and love, the most complex of them all. Not a single emotion, but a constellation. Joy, trust, desire, fear, hope. It binds individuals into systems, families, tribes, civilizations. Oxytocin weaves connection. Dopamine sparks longing. Endorphins soothe. Yet none of these explain love completely. To reduce it to molecules is like explaining music by counting vibrations. Love is the architecture of life's continuity, the mind's way of ensuring that one heartbeat seeks another. But emotion is not always clear. It is layered, overlapping, often contradictory. You can feel pride and shame at once, relief and sorrow in the same breath. The mind rarely holds one feeling in isolation. It holds weather, shifting patterns of inner sky. Just as the earth has climate and storm, the psyche has moods and tempest. And like all weather, emotion passes. What feels endless in the moment softens with time, dissolving back into stillness. The circuitry of emotion is not confined to the head. The body, too, participates in every feeling. The gut, lined with millions of neurons, mirrors the brain's chemistry, tightening with anxiety, relaxing with calm. The heart, sensitive to hormones and rhythm, responds to emotional tides like a drum echoing distant thunder. Emotion, in truth, is not a thought you have. It is a state you become. And though emotions can seem unruly, they follow patterns, quiet logics of their own. They emerge to guide action, to approach, to withdraw, to protect, to connect. Even anger, when understood, is a signal of boundary, a flare marking where self ends and world begins. To feel deeply is not weakness but information, the body's wisdom translating the language of life. Over time, the mind learns to sculpt these feelings, to regulate, not suppress, to breathe through fear, to hold sadness without drowning, to let joy expand without grasping. Emotional intelligence is this art, not mastery over feeling, but harmony with it. To live well is to play in tune with your inner orchestra, knowing when to let a note linger and when to let it fade. Emotion also shapes memory. Events soaked in strong feeling etch deeper marks in the brain. We remember not days, but moods, how something made us feel. The hippocampus records the facts, but the amygdala decides their importance. Thus, memory becomes emotional architecture, a map of what mattered most. Our sense of self, over time, is built from these emotional traces, joy becoming identity, pain becoming wisdom, and so beneath the narratives of who we think we are, the emotional current keeps flowing, steady, ancient, alive. It moves through every decision, every creation, every act of empathy. Even the pursuit of knowledge, the desire to understand the universe, is emotional at its core. A longing for connection, for wonder, for meaning. Emotion is not the opposite of reason. It is reason's pulse, its living foundation. To feel is to know the world not through calculation, but through resonance. Every emotion, even the difficult ones, is a thread in the great weaving of consciousness, the texture that makes experience human. And when the surge quiets, when joy softens, when sorrow fades, what remains is awareness itself, the still water beneath the waves. From that calm, the mind begins to ask again, who is it that feels? Who stands at the center of all this motion, watching the tides rise and fall? That question waits in the mirror ahead. When you look into a mirror, you see something that seems simple, a face, a pair of eyes, the quiet familiarity of your own reflection. Yet beneath that image lies a mystery, that has haunted minds for centuries. Who is the one doing the looking? The face is flesh, the eyes are organs, but the I behind them, the sense of being someone, feels like something more. It feels solid, continuous, certain, and yet, when examined closely, that certainty begins to shimmer and blur like a reflection trembling on water. The self, as science and philosophy both suggest, is not a thing but a process. It is a melody played across the instruments of the brain, shifting, adapting, reweaving itself moment to moment. The neurons in your head are not the same ones you had years ago. Your memories are rewritten each time you recall them. Your body renews itself cell by cell. Yet somehow, through this endless change, a single thread persists: the feeling that you remain. This illusion of continuity is not a flaw, but a function. It is the mind's way of maintaining coherence in a world that never stops moving. Inside the brain, no single place houses the self. There is no throne room of identity, no single neuron that declares I am. Instead, countless regions collaborate, the prefrontal cortex reflecting on choices, the parietal lobes mapping the body, the hippocampus weaving memory into story. Each plays its note in the symphony of consciousness, and from their harmony arises the experience of me. The self is an emergent property, the pattern that forms when perception, memory, and emotion dance together in perfect synchronization. Consider how that dance unfolds. Perception brings in the world in colors, sounds, sensations. Memory links them to the past, what you've felt before, what you've known. Emotion gives them value. What matters, what hurts, what delights. Together they create a frame, a narrative, a point of view. That frame is the self, the perspective through which existence is seen, but it is not fixed. It bends with time, shifting as you learn, as you forget, as you love and lose. Like a story written in sand, it changes with every tide of experience. To test its fragility, imagine waking one morning with all memory gone. You would still see, hear, breathe, but who would you be? The body remains, the senses still flow, yet the story is erased. Without memory, self dissolves. The mind depends on narrative to anchor its identity. The past, even when distorted or incomplete, becomes the scaffolding of I. Each remembered joy or sorrow, each decision or regret, is a thread woven into the tapestry of selfhood. Take them away, and what remains is pure awareness, vast, formless, unclaimed. In moments of deep meditation or awe, that thread loosens. The sense of I softens, and awareness becomes wide, borderless. The boundaries between self and world blur, and for a heartbeat, you are not the observer, but the observed. Consciousness itself, without division. Many describe it as peace, others as unity. Science describes it as a change in neural patterns, the quieting of the default mode network, the system that constantly constructs the narrative of self. But labels cannot capture the feeling, that strange, luminous stillness of being without identity, where everything is both inside and outside at once. And yet, we cannot live there forever. The self returns as it must, a necessary fiction. It helps us move through life, make choices, find continuity. Without it, we would drift like waves without shore. The mind builds the self as a map, not of what is, but of how to move through what is. It is a useful illusion, the compass of consciousness, but this illusion has weight. It clings. The stories we tell about who we are become cages as much as guides. I am this, we say. I am not that. The brain, seeking stability, defends its identity fiercely. When beliefs are challenged, when values are threatened, the body reacts as if under attack. The amygdala fires, adrenaline surges, the self armors itself. To question who you are is to stir the deepest instincts of survival. Yet growth begins there, in the soft dismantling of certainty. When you realize that the self is not a single truth but a living narrative, it becomes something fluid, creative. You are not the person you were yesterday, nor the one you will be tomorrow. The mind edits constantly, adjusting the story to match experience. Memory reshapes itself to protect meaning, to preserve coherence. In this way, the self is less a photograph than a song. Each day, another verse, echoing themes but never repeating exactly the same. Even the sense of ownership, of my thoughts, my feelings, my actions, is not as clear as it seems. Neuroscience shows that decisions begin milliseconds before we are aware of making them. The brain acts, then tells the story after, creating the illusion of control. You are both author and audience, consciousness watching its own play unfold. The self is the narrator, arriving just in time to claim credit for the plot already in motion. And yet, despite all its illusions, the self feels real because it is experienced. Like the rainbow, not an object, but a phenomenon, it appears only when conditions align: light, angle, perception. The rainbow does not exist in the air, but in the meeting of light and eye. The self, too, exists in the meeting of brain and awareness, story and sensation. It is real in the way a melody is real, intangible yet undeniable. Across cultures and philosophies, the question of self has been answered in countless ways. Some call it soul, others call it mind, others nothing at all. Only a collection of passing experiences mistaken for a whole. Buddhism teaches anatta, the no-self, that identity is impermanent and attachment to it is the root of suffering. Modern neuroscience, from another path, reaches a similar horizon. The self is not a single entity but a process in flux. Two traditions, one truth seen from different sides. That what we call I is both essential and empty, both real and illusion. This realization does not erase the self, it softens it. It turns identity from stone to water. When you see yourself as story, you can rewrite gently. When you see yourself as song, you can change key without fear. The self becomes not a boundary, but a bridge. A way for consciousness to meet the world and return transformed. In moments of empathy, that bridge extends outward. Another's pain becomes your own. Another's joy lights your face. The self stretches, blurring again, reminding you that identity is never solitary. Every I is built from others, their voices, their touch, their reflection in your eyes. The mind learns itself through relationship, through mirroring, through connection. The self exists not in isolation, but in exchange. And so, as you gaze again into the mirror, perhaps you see more than a face. You see a mosaic, memory, emotion, perception, all layered into the illusion of one. You see a reflection made of others' reflections, a song shaped by countless harmonies. You see not who you are, but who you are becoming. An unfinished melody still being written by experience, and behind it all, awareness watches, silent, infinite, unbound. It waits for the next revelation. That the self you find in solitude is only half the story. The other half lives in connection, in empathy, in shared understanding, in the subtle mirroring that unites one consciousness with another. That is where we go next. In the vast quiet of existence, no mind truly stands alone. Even in solitude, we carry the echoes of others, the words they spoke, the gestures we mirrored, the warmth or absence of connection. The mind, though housed in one's skull, has always been plural. It learns through imitation, grows through interaction, and dreams through the eyes of community. In ancient times, survival depended on synchrony, moving as a group, reading faces, sensing intent. Before language, there were glances and tones, movements and mimicry. Somewhere in that silent exchange, neurons began to mirror. Mirror neurons, small, astonishing mechanisms, allowed one mind to to feel what another did, to see a gesture and sense the motion inside one's own muscles, to see pain and for a moment ache with it. Empathy was born not from words, but from reflection. Every society, from tribe to city, is a network of shared perception. We align with others through invisible threads, emotional harmonies, social cues, and stories. The mind craves resonance. When people speak, their brain waves subtly synchronize. When they listen to music together, their heartbeats can fall into rhythm. Connection, in its essence, is physical. The brain does not simply talk, it tunes. Language became the grand instrument of this tuning. It allowed minds to build common realities, to translate thought into sound and sound back into thought. Each word carries the imprint of countless generations before us, each sentence a small echo of human evolution. Through language, the private became shared. Thoughts leapt from skull to skull, and humanity became a collective storyteller. But language also divided us. Words define, but they also limit. They shape what can be expressed and what cannot. Culture, belief, identity, all arise from the boundaries that shared language creates. To belong is to adopt a version of the world that others recognize. And yet, beneath the boundaries, all minds share a common architecture. The same electric longing to be seen, to be known. Empathy, that mysterious bridge, makes this recognition possible. It allows us to inhabit another's perspective, to simulate their joy or sorrow. Neuroscience reveals that empathy is not just a moral act, it's a biological one. Our brains light up in shared circuits when we observe suffering or affection. To understand another is, in a sense, to become them for a moment. Still, empathy has its limits. The same systems that bond us also divide us, distinguishing us from them. The social mind evolved for belonging, not universal compassion. It is protective, selective, shaped by tribal pasts. And yet in modern life, that ancient mechanism faces an expanded world. Millions of faces, infinite voices, endless mirrors. Digital life extends our neural web further than evolution imagined. Every post, every message, every conversation becomes part of a shared consciousness, a planetary mind made of signals and screens. We feel connected to strangers oceans away, yet lonelier in rooms filled with blue light. The brain's old social circuits are overwhelmed, trying to grasp a scale of belonging it was never built for. And so the question deepens. Where does one mind end and another begin? Each thought carries traces of others. Words learned from parents, ideas absorbed from culture, emotions shaped by relationships. Even solitude is crowded with invisible presences. The I that speaks is a chorus, a composite of interactions past and present. Perhaps to understand consciousness fully, we must stop looking only within and start listening between. Between speaker and listener, between heartbeat and heartbeat, between mind and mind, there lies a field of shared awareness. A place where empathy becomes communication, and communication becomes creation. In that invisible field, humanity becomes one great organism, countless neurons of a larger brain, pulsing with thought and memory. The social mind is not just how we connect, it is what we are. Every conversation rewires the species. Every act of understanding makes the world more conscious. And when we look at each other, truly look, we don't just see another person, we see the reflection of the network that made us. The quiet realization that thought was never meant to be alone. The shared mind connects us across space, empathy, language, emotion. But time is its other dimension. What binds us across generations? How does memory become history and imagination, future? As we move forward, we'll slow down to explore how the mind not only thinks in time, but creates it. Time. We measure it with clocks, track it in calendars, chase it through schedules. But the mind keeps a different rhythm. It does not tick or count. It flows and folds. It stretches a moment into an eternity, or lets hours disappear in what feels like a breath. Inside consciousness, time becomes something elastic, woven not by seconds but by attention, memory, and imagination. When we recall the past, we are not traveling backward, we are rebuilding. Memory reassembles fragments, filling gaps with imagination until the past feels whole again. But it's never exact. Every act of remembering subtly rewrites what came before. The mind doesn't store a film reel. It keeps sketches, impressions, emotions. To remember is to recreate. The past, then, is not behind us. It lives within the present, reshaped each time we look back. And the future? It too exists here. Not yet formed, but already imagined. When the mind dreams forward, it builds simulations. We picture outcomes, predict reactions, rehearse what might be. The same networks that recall the past ignite when we imagine the future. The brain uses yesterday's architecture to build tomorrow's possibilities. In this way, time inside the mind is circular. Memory and anticipation feeding one another in an endless loop. But even the present is not what it seems. Neuroscientists suggest that consciousness lags slightly behind reality, that what we call now is a carefully constructed illusion, stitched together from sensory fragments that arrive out of sync. By the time you hear a note or see a flash of light, your brain has already woven those signals into a story of simultaneity. The present moment, then, is not a single point. It's a moving window, a half-second of perception we mistake for now. This means our experience of time is deeply personal. A minute can feel long or short, depending on the mind's state. Fear slows it down, every heartbeat distinct. Joy and flow make it vanish. Minutes collapsing into moments. Time does not pass uniformly within us. It breathes. It expands when we are waiting and contracts when we are living. Cultures throughout history have sensed this truth long before neuroscience confirmed it. Ancient mystics spoke of timelessness in meditation, artists of the eternal moment in creation. Modern physics tells us that time bends with gravity. Psychology tells us it bends with thought. Einstein once said, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." The brain seems to agree. Dreams reveal this bending most clearly. In sleep, hours can pass in seconds and seconds can unfold into vast dreamscapes. The mind is freed from the clock entirely, moving between memories and fantasies without boundaries. In dreams, time behaves as it does within imagination, fluid, symbolic, emotional. Perhaps consciousness itself is not bound by time, but rather creates it. The brain organizes experience into a sequence to make sense of change, to turn chaos into story. Without memory, there is no before. Without imagination, no after. Without awareness, no now. Time is a construct of the mind's need for meaning, and yet we feel it passing. We feel it in nostalgia, the ache for what once was, though it still lives inside us. We feel it in anticipation, the thrill or fear of what has not yet come. These feelings give texture to time, transforming it from mere motion into emotion. Time is not just measured by clocks, but by longing, reflection, and hope. If we look closely, we see that consciousness doesn't move through time. It gathers it. Every thought contains traces of the past and seeds of the future. The mind is a bridge where moments converge, a living archive of everything that has been and might be. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of being human, that we can hold eternity in a heartbeat. To live, to remember, to imagine is to weave time itself. If time is the loom, then imagination is the thread, the colorful weave of worlds that never were. As we drift forward, we leave behind the ticking clock and step into the infinite, where the mind creates what it cannot yet see, and thought becomes art. Close your eyes, and a world begins to bloom. Shapes form, colors breathe, and motion stirs where no light falls. This is imagination, the quiet architect of unseen places, the force that builds before anything exists. Within its reach, the mind paints galaxies on the darkness of thought, bending what is known toward what could be. Imagination begins not in grandeur, but in fragments. A memory, a scent, a flicker of curiosity. The brain gathers these pieces like threads, weaving patterns that transcend logic. When you daydream, the same neural circuits that process reality awaken again. To the brain, imagination and perception are siblings. Both are acts of creation, differing only in what they draw from. One from the world outside, the other from the world within. Every invention, every poem, every possibility humanity has ever touched began as this private flicker, a rehearsal of reality inside the theatre of the mind. The imagination is not escape, it is experiment. The brain runs silent simulations, testing choices, predicting outcomes, sketching futures before the body moves. This hidden rehearsal allows us to step into a moment before it happens, to prepare for the unknown. It is the mind's most ancient survival tool disguised as art. Yet imagination is not purely practical. It also dances with freely, senselessly, beautifully. When the mind drifts without purpose, it enters a state of creative wandering. The brain's default mode network hums softly in this space, a constellation of regions that activate when we are not focused, when attention dissolves into reverie. Here, images merge without boundaries. Time loses sequence. Meaning bends into metaphor. The mind begins to dream while awake. Children live in this state naturally. For them, a cardboard box is a ship, a shadow, a companion, a thought, a living thing. As adults, we learn to tame this wild current, to measure and categorize, to trade wonder for certainty. But imagination never disappears. It merely hides beneath the surface of reason, waiting for moments of stillness to resurface. In the quiet afterthought, it breathes again. Science, too, depends on imagination. Before an equation can be proven, it must be pictured. Before a discovery can be measured, it must first be believed possible. Einstein dreamed in imagery long before he wrote in mathematics. Marie Curie imagined atoms she could never see. Every breakthrough begins with the leap of seeing what isn't yet visible. Imagination is not opposed to reason. It is its foundation, the fertile soil from which logic grows. Artists understand this intuitively. A painter's brush moves not from sight, but from the invisible rhythm beneath it. The felt image, the intuition. A writer listens for voices that do not yet have form. The creative process is less invention and more listening. A surrender to what the mind whispers when the conscious world grows quiet. In these moments, imagination becomes a bridge between the seen and the unseen, between the real and the possible. And imagination does more than create. It connects. When you empathize, you imagine what it is like to be another, to inhabit their world, their pain, their joy. Without imagination, there is no compassion. To picture another's experience is the most profound act of shared humanity. Through it, minds overlap. Through it, understanding becomes possible. Dreams, too, are imagination unbound. They take fragments of memory and emotion and rearrange them into impossible stories. In them, we see how deeply the mind loves to create, not just to represent the world, but to transform it. Every dream is a small rehearsal of creation, a nightly painting that fades at dawn but leaves a trace in the waking mind. When imagination turns inward, it begins to sculpt the self. The story you tell of who you are, your identity, your hopes, your fears, all are acts of creative construction. You are in part a story you imagine about yourself. The mind, ever the artist, shapes this narrative continuously, revising it with each experience, each revelation. Identity, like art, is always unfinished. There is beauty in this incompleteness. To imagine is to remain open, unfinished, curious. It is to live at the edge of what is known, to reach into the darkness with faith that something meaningful waits to be found. Imagination is the light that moves before understanding, the gentle glow that reveals where knowledge may one day arrive, and perhaps the universe itself is an act of imagination. Consciousness dreaming itself into matter, exploring its own reflection through countless forms. The cosmos, in this view, is the mind thinking aloud, each star a spark of possibility. As you listen, perhaps you notice your own thoughts begin to drift, to wander toward ideas not yet formed, to images that flicker like distant firelight. That, too, is imagination, the quiet current that carries the human spirit forward. But not all creation rises into awareness. Beneath the bright surface of thought, another force moves, deeper, older, unseen. It shapes what we feel, what we choose, what we fear. To understand the whole mind, we must dive below the light of imagination and descend into the shadows that dream beneath it. Beneath the bright surface of awareness, something vast and wordless stirs. It is the deep ocean of the unconscious, i.e., the silent, unseen mind that moves long before you do. You can sense it sometimes, like a tide beneath thought, shaping your choices, your fears, your desires. It whispers through instinct and dreams, through sudden emotions you cannot name. The conscious self floats on its surface, believing it steers the vessel, yet the deeper currents decide where the journey truly goes. Imagine diving beneath the calm mirror of your thoughts. The light fades slowly, the noise of reason softens, and the water grows thick with memory and feeling. Down here, the mind is not made of language. It speaks in symbols, in images, in sensations. It remembers things you have forgotten and guards things you never meant to hide. The unconscious is not darkness as in absence, but darkness as in depth, a place where light has not yet reached. Freud once called it the hidden theater of the mind, where unseen actors perform their parts just outside awareness. Modern neuroscience, though more cautious in its poetry, agrees with the essence of the idea. Most of what the brain does, it does without your knowing. Every heartbeat, every decision, every glance involves networks that flicker and resolve before you can think them through. The unconscious is the quiet engineer behind every act of being. Consider how you read these words. Your eyes dart across the lines. Your brain decodes shapes into meaning. Memory recognizes patterns. Emotion colors tone, all in less than a heartbeat. You do none of this consciously. The mind's unseen layers handle it effortlessly, leaving awareness free to experience the illusion of control. The unconscious is not separate from you. It is you in a form too vast to notice, and yet this hidden realm is not mechanical alone. It dreams. In sleep, when reason dissolves, the unconscious rises to speak. Dreams are its language, metaphors wrapped in emotion. They reassemble the day's fragments into stories the conscious mind can barely interpret. When you dream of falling, of running, of speaking to the dead, it is not nonsense. It is meaning rearranged in code. The unconscious does not lie. It translates. Artists and mystics have long sought to speak directly to this hidden self. Surrealists painted its symbols. Poets listened for its voice between waking and sleep. Monks sat in silence until the noise of thought faded enough for the deeper music to emerge. They understood that the unconscious is not a cage, but a cosmos, one that mirrors both our individual past and the ancient memory of the species itself. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious, the shared inheritance of archetypes, symbols, and instincts that ripple through all humanity. The mother, the shadow, the hero, the trickster. Patterns older than history, recurring across cultures and myths. To encounter these archetypes is to meet the timeless mind within us, the part that remembers long before birth. The unconscious, in this sense, is not just personal. It is ancestral, but it is not always gentle. In its depths live the shadows we turn away from, our anger, our envy, our grief, our fear. These are not enemies, but unintegrated parts of ourselves. When ignored, they find their way into dreams, slips of the tongue, sudden reactions. To descend into the unconscious is to meet these shadows with compassion. It is the slow work of making the unseen known, of transforming what frightens us into what frees us. Science now maps these shadows with fMRI scans and neural models, but the mystery remains. Even the most advanced imaging reveals that thought begins before thought, that the brain decides milliseconds before you believe you've chosen. Free will, it seems, is not the act of commanding the mind, but of witnessing what it has already begun. Awareness is not the driver of the car, but the passenger, slowly realizing the direction. Still, awareness matters. When you bring attention to what lies beneath, the currents shift. Mindfulness, therapy, creativity, all are ways of lowering a lantern into the depths. Light does not banish shadow, it reveals its shape. When we listen to the unconscious, it becomes less a threat and more a guide. It shows us where we've been avoiding ourselves, and where our truest instincts still wait to be heard. Perhaps this hidden mind is not so different from the ocean itself. Dangerous when resisted, beautiful when understood. You cannot stop its tides, but you can learn to float upon them, to move with their rhythm. The unconscious carries you toward what you most need to learn, even when you resist the lesson. It is the teacher that speaks in dreams, in slips, in déjà vu, subtle messages from the deep. And if you sit quietly enough, you can almost feel it. The faint pressure of the unknown beneath your thoughts, the soft pulse of something ancient watching through your eyes. The unconscious is not below you after all. It is around you, within you, behind every act of awareness. Consciousness is simply the surface where that great depth meets the light. We live between these two worlds, the known and the unseen, the thought and the impulse, the symbol and the story. And somewhere between them, identity is formed, shaped and reshaped by what the conscious mind dares to acknowledge. But the unconscious does not only dwell in thought, it lives in flesh. Every heartbeat, every trembling muscle, every breath is its language too. The body remembers what the mind forgets. To understand the full expanse of mind, we must listen not just inward, but downward into the pulse that speaks without words. The mind is often pictured as a pilot inside a machine. The body, its vessel, its instrument, its obedient tool. But this image is an illusion. The mind is not trapped within the skull. It breathes through the body. It feels through skin, listens through muscle, dreams through heartbeat. The boundary between thought and flesh is not a wall, but a whisper. A conversation so ancient and constant that we forget it's happening. Every sensation, every breath, every subtle flutter of the pulse carries a message upward. The brain does not command the body from above. It listens to it from within. Neural highways run not only downward, issuing orders to move, but upward, filled with signals about pressure, temperature, hunger, and balance. These countless silent transmissions form the body's language, a wordless stream of information shaping every emotion and decision. When you feel a sudden unease before knowing why, it is not imagination. It is the body thinking. The gut tightens, the heartbeat shifts, the skin tingles. These are not background noises, but ancient intuitions, honed through evolution long before words or reason existed. The gut feeling is not metaphor. It is biology's quiet reasoning, the wisdom of millions of years of survival speaking in the only language it knows, sensation. Science has begun to rediscover what older traditions never forgot, that consciousness is not confined to the brain alone. The enteric nervous system, a network of over 100 million neurons woven through the digestive tract, mirrors the structure of the brain so closely that researchers sometimes call it the second brain. It influences mood, decision, and perception. When the gut shifts, so does the mind. The two are in continuous dialogue, a duet of chemistry and feeling. The same is true of the heart. Each beat sends more than blood. It sends rhythm, a pulse that the brain synchronizes with. Studies show that emotions rise and fall in harmony with heart rate variability, as if thought were carried upon the tide of circulation. When you breathe deeply and slowly, you are not just calming yourself. You are reshaping your mind's electrical rhythm. The breath becomes a bridge between the physical and the mental, a steady signal telling the brain that it is safe to soften. We experience this harmony most clearly in moments of flow, when action and awareness merge so completely that the body seems to think for us. A musician's hands know where to go before intention forms. A dancer moves before deciding. In these moments, the body is not following the mind. It is the mind extended into space and motion. The self dissolves into action, and for a brief time, thought and flesh become one. Yet in modern life, we often forget this union. We live in our heads, chasing abstractions, measuring, calculating, while the body waits, unheard. We silence its signals with distraction, override its fatigue with caffeine, drown its sadness with noise. But the body remembers what the mind denies. It stores emotion in posture, in muscle tension, in the quiet ache of the chest, or the knot in the stomach. These are not random pains. They are memories written in tissue, waiting for awareness to translate them. Healing often begins when the body is allowed to speak again. Through movement, stillness, or breath, it re-enters the conversation it was never meant to leave. Meditation is not only a mental act, it is the reuniting of the body with the mind, the rediscovery of their shared rhythm. As attention sinks into the breath, the boundary between thought and sensation blurs. The heartbeat becomes a drumbeat of awareness. The body becomes a cathedral of knowing. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding in science and philosophy alike is that mind and body are separate things, one mechanical, the other mystical. But biology reveals no such divide. The same molecules that carry thoughts also move muscles. The same chemicals that form emotions circulate through blood. Every idea has a pulse. Every feeling leaves a trace in flesh. The self is not contained in a single organ. It is an ecosystem, alive and communicating in every direction. Even our perception of the world depends on this embodied mind. When you see, you do not simply record light. Your muscles adjust, your pupils shift, your heart subtly alters its rhythm. When you touch, your skin doesn't just feel the world. It teaches the mind what to believe about it. The body is not the mind's servant. It is its stage, its echo chamber, its mirror. Perhaps this is why moments of pure presence, the slow breath before sleep, the stillness after a long walk, the quiet awe before beauty, feels so deeply peaceful. In them, the conversation between body and mind becomes wordless harmony. Awareness settles into the pulse, and the pulse becomes thought. There is no separation, no observer, only the ongoing rhythm of being alive. If consciousness were to vanish from the body, the world would lose its color, its warmth, its touch. The body gives thought its texture, its gravity, its truth. Without the senses, ideas would be empty. Without sensation, meaning would have no ground. The body is how the mind touches reality, and how reality touches back. And so perhaps to understand the mind fully, we must feel it, not in theory, but in breath, in heartbeat, in the subtle pulse of awareness as it moves through muscle and bone. For in each of these tiny rhythms, the great mystery of being continues. The dance between matter and meaning, between neuron and nerve, between knowing and feeling. But even as body and mind move together, another question shimmers beneath. What is it that knows this unity? What is the light behind the eyes, the witness of thought and flesh alike? As we rise from the rhythm of the body, we approach the heart of the mystery. Consciousness itself, the silent glow by which all experience becomes known. What is it that looks out from behind the eyes? Not the brain, but the organ is silent without color or light. Not the thoughts, they flicker and vanish as soon as they arise. And not the senses, seen for sound, sight, and touch, all unfold within something else, something more fundamental. We call that something consciousness. the quiet field in which all experience appears. Every color, every idea, every feeling is a ripple upon it. Without it, there is nothing. Consciousness is not what we see, it is what sees. It is the light by which the mind knows itself. Science can describe the mechanics of the brain in exquisite detail. Neurons firing, synapses passing signals, chemicals dancing between them. But when it tries to explain awareness itself, the simple fact that there is something it is like to be, the mystery deepens. No matter how closely we examine the circuits, nowhere do we find the glow of knowing. The brain can be mapped, measured, modeled, yet consciousness remains the silent witness behind the map. Some call it an emergent property, the natural byproduct of complexity. When enough neurons communicate in the right way, awareness ignites, like a flame born from friction. Others see it as something deeper, not the result of matter, but the foundation of it. Perhaps consciousness is not produced by the universe, but is the universe knowing itself. In this view, we are not observers of reality. We are reality, momentarily aware. No experiment has yet settled this debate. We can detect brainwaves, track attention, even predict decisions milliseconds before they rise to awareness. But the inner light itself cannot be captured. It does not appear on a scan because it is the one doing the seeing. The observer can measure everything but the act of observation itself. Still, we feel its presence constantly. It is in the warmth of sunlight on skin, in the sound of rain, in the quiet recognition of I am. Even when thoughts fall silent, awareness remains. Like the sky holding clouds that come and go, you can close your eyes, forget your name, lose all memories and yet something still knows the darkness behind the eyelids. That knowing is consciousness, the most intimate and yet the most mysterious aspect of existence. Philosophers have long stood at its edge. Descartes began with, I think, therefore I am. But even before thought, there is being aware of thought. The true certainty is not thinking, but knowing that there is knowing. That simple awareness cannot be doubted, for it is the ground on which all doubt stands. In Eastern traditions, this mystery has been explored not through reasoning, but through direct experience. They speak of consciousness as the ocean and thoughts as its waves. When the waves calm, the surface reflects everything: sky, stars, infinity, perfectly. To see clearly, one does not add more thought but less. Awareness deepens not by thinking harder, but by being still enough to notice what was always there. Modern neuroscience, in its own language, hints at the same. When the brain enters states of quiet, in meditation, deep rest, or moments of awe, activity across regions becomes synchronized, almost rhythmic. The self-other boundary softens. The chatter of the default mode network, the inner narrator of me, fades. In that silence, subjects often report a peculiar clarity. Not sleep, not trance, but vivid presence. As if consciousness, relieved of its usual noise, begins to experience itself. Perhaps consciousness is not located in the brain, but expressed through it, the way music flows through an instrument. The violin does not create the melody, it gives it form. When the instrument is tuned and whole, the music flows beautifully. When damaged, it falters. But the music itself, the potential for sound, remains. So too, perhaps, with awareness and the brain. And yet, even this metaphor falls short. For consciousness is not something that flows or exists in time. It is the very stage on which time appears. It is what allows the feeling of seconds passing, what witnesses memory unfold and imagination arise. Without awareness, there is no past, no future, no world, only silence. This is the paradox at the heart of all inquiry. The mind seeks to know consciousness, but the seeker is what it seeks. The flashlight cannot illuminate its own bulb. The eye cannot turn inward to see itself. And yet, there is a subtle recognition that needs no distance, a knowing of knowing, quiet and self-contained, Some scientists now propose that consciousness may be woven into the fabric of reality itself, a fundamental feature like gravity or space-time. In that view, every particle, every atom carries a glimmer of awareness, a spark of subjective being. Complex organisms like humans do not create consciousness. They concentrate it, shaping it into the intricate dance of thought and emotion. If that is true, then awareness did not begin with us. It has always been here, watching through every form, from starlight to stone. But even if consciousness arises purely from biology, its presence remains astonishing. From lifeless matter came awareness capable of reflecting on itself. The universe, through us, asking, "What am I?" This self-recognition might be the cosmos's rarest event. Atoms that once burned in stars, now wondering about their own existence. Perhaps that is the true miracle, not supernatural, but deeply natural. The world becoming aware of its own beauty. In the end, no theory can fully capture consciousness, because consciousness is what all theories arise within. It is not an object to be found, it is the ground of finding itself. It is both the question and the one who asks. To study it is to stare into a mirror, one that reflects not form, but the luminous fact of being. And when we let go of the need to explain it, when we stop dissecting and simply rest in awareness, a different kind of understanding unfolds. The mind grows quiet, and what remains is presence, open, effortless, radiant. The same presence that looked out from your childhood eyes, that dreams when you sleep, that listens now. It has never aged, never moved, never changed, only the scenery has. In that stillness, one begins to sense that consciousness is not in us at all. We are in it, brief flickers of form within an endless expanse of knowing, the light that knows itself, and so we turn inward one final time, past thought, past sense, past self, into the still, silent awareness from which it all began. The mind's long journey ends not in discovery, but in return. Here, in this quiet center, science meets silence. Here, the listener is invited to simply be, to rest in the infinite within. There comes a point in every journey where words begin to dissolve, where questions no longer reach and answers no longer matter. It is not an ending, but a quiet return to the space from which everything first arose. We have traveled through the architecture of the brain, wandered among neurons, memories, dreams, and consciousness itself. We have watched the mind weave reality from light and thought, and we have stood at the edge of awareness, looking into the mirror that looks back. Now, as the noise of curiosity softens, what remains is stillness, the infinite within. This stillness is not empty. It is full, a presence of quiet knowing, of life itself unfolding without effort. It is the same silence that hums behind every heartbeat, the same awareness that listens between every word. When you stop trying to understand it, it begins to reveal itself. Science often seeks the how of things, how neurons fire, how consciousness arises, how thought becomes experience. But beyond the how lies that there is something at all, that we exist, that awareness exists, that reality is. It is the simplest and most profound truth. There is knowing. The great mystery of the mind is not in its complexity, but in its simplicity. You can strip away memory, language, identity, and yet something remains watching. As that watcher has no name, no age, no boundary. It was there in your first breath, and it will remain when all stories fade. It is not yours, it is you. To touch this stillness is not to withdraw from life, but to see life more clearly. The noise of thought becomes softer, and in that quiet the world grows luminous. A single moment of awareness, the feeling of breath, the glint of light on a wall, the sound of rain, becomes infinite. The ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary, not because it changes, but because you do. In that realization, curiosity and peace become one. Curiosity asks, what is this?
Peace answers, this is.
The two are not opposites, but reflections of the same awareness, the mind moving and the mind resting. Perhaps that is the heart of it all. Curiosity itself is a form of peace. There is no grand conclusion waiting at the end of the mind's exploration.
Only this, the quiet awareness you have carried all along.
It does not demand belief or explanation. It only asks to be noticed. So for a moment allow everything to fall away. Let the thought slow. Let the breath deepen. Let awareness simply be aware of itself. This, right here, is what you've been searching for even before you began. Soft pause. When we began this journey, I asked you a question. What is the mind? Perhaps now the answer is not something to say, but something to feel. It's not in the neurons or the networks, but in the space of knowing that holds them. The mind is not a machine, not a storm of chemicals. It is the living mystery of awareness meeting the world. And that mystery lives within you, endlessly unfolding, endlessly new. Thank you for walking this path, for listening, wondering, and feeling with patience and openness. If this journey has brought you calm, curiosity, or even a single moment of stillness, then the exploration continues, not here,
but within you, if you'd like to wander further with us, into sleep,
into thought, into the soft edges of understanding. You can stay close.
A like, a gentle subscription is how we keep traveling together, one quiet question at a time. For now, rest easy in the space you've discovered.
The mind has turned inward, and the infinite is no longer out there. It is here, now, in you. As the sound fades and silence returns, remember, you are not in awareness. You are awareness, and awareness is infinite.